As Liza mentioned earlier in the service, about 30 of us within this church community participated in beloved conversations over the last 3 months, including myself. Although I have participated in similar kinds of programs in the past, it was so valuable to me to dedicate both the time and emotional space to my own development and self-care. The program tailored its learning goals and curriculum to address the spiritual needs of both white folks and Black, Indigenous, and people of color in this broad work of embodying racial justice as spiritual practice. Today, you will hear 3 reflections from fellow church members who participated in both tracks of the program: Unlearning/Learning for Liberation, which was geared towards white participants, and Gathering Ourselves, which was geared towards BIPOC participants. And first, I would like to invite Leslie Parr to share with us her reflection.
Good morning. Austin Channing Brown, author of I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness, writes, oftentimes we say you gotta be in proximity with each other. You gotta be friends. You gotta sit at a table together. White folks need to take a step back instead of seeking out that friend, that person who's going to teach them. They should seek out education, books, spaces where people of color are willing to talk, the lecture, the class, the book studies, the spaces where people of color have already agreed to share their stories with you. That way, when you come into proximity with people of color, you will have a larger foundation to build a relationship as opposed to using me as your teacher. The goal of our friendship shouldn't be for me to be your teacher. It should be me as your friend. For me, this captures the essence of beloved conversations. As I've participated in the program, seeking the education, readings, poems, films, as well as meeting with my pod, members of our UCM congregation, I've reached insights about racial justice. Among them, my white perspective is so powerful, it diminishes my life in ways I don't even recognize. I was in a Burlington market recently when an African-American man reached out. "You're from Montpelier." I turned to him. I didn't recognize him. He reminded me that he had once lived on my street. I paused. How could I not know him? I asked about his family. Now I remembered his younger brother had been a friend of my daughter's. The memory of the boy who became this man emerged. "How good to see you. What are you doing these days?" I asked. He said, "I've worked at the airport, but right now I don't have a job." "I hope that changes," I said. "It's so good to see you." We parted. How could I have forgotten this neighbor of years ago? This might have been a joyful moment of reconnection. And I wondered about what it is like to be unemployed, Black, in Burlington, Vermont, in the middle of a pandemic, and all the rest. It shook me up. So what, you might ask, and how does this relate to beloved conversations? And I respond, how many times have I filtered out people and experiences because of my world made by whiteness? I shared this story with my pod. We are speaking uncomfortable truths within a comfort zone that has grown wider by learning and trusting. We've been reading the books, seeing the films, enjoying the poetry, art, and music offered in the beloved conversation. This influences my encounter in Burlington. I hope by digging deep these days, I will be breaking the bounds of whiteness for the larger truths.
Thank you so much, Leslie, for sharing your truth with us and your experience. Now we'll be hearing from Jeremy Beaudry.
Thanks, Joan. Good morning. My participation with the Beloved Conversations program has been an important step for me in my journey from being comfortably and complacently not racist to being proactively anti-racist. The curriculum resources and the rich discussions and the Learning Pod group helped me become more aware of my position and privilege as a white person, as someone who daily reaps the benefits of the status quo of white supremacy in our society. My Learning Pod included folks from other UU congregations living in New England and as far south as North Carolina and South Carolina. This offered a wonderful opportunity to hear quite different perspectives on the resources and discussion topics. These 90-minute conversations held every few weeks were, for me, the most rewarding part of the program. Our group quickly built trust and comfort enough to share our questions, concerns, mistakes, and insights about our individual experiences of racism, whiteness, and white supremacy. The program covenant challenged me to sharpen my listening skills. And with conscious practice and intention, I learned how to be a better listener, to listen to others without judgment and without the intent to convince others of my point of view. I found that as I deepened my ability to listen in the Learning Pod conversations, the purpose of how I listened matured. I was listening to learn, listening to reflect and grow. I probably remarked to my new friends every pod conversation on some small epiphany I had regarding my evolving sense of my white male identity and how I relate to BIPOC individuals. My deepened practice of listening connects to another important lesson from Beloved Conversations about how I intend to show up in spaces where different identities are present. The key question I came away with is this: what does it take for others to trust me? Specifically, how do I build trust with BIPOC folks who have every reason to not trust me as a white man? Something I heard from more than one of the featured BIPOC speakers and authors in the program is how frustrating it can be to collaborate with white people, even well-intentioned white people perhaps, in racial justice movements because of our reluctance to let BIPOC folks lead, to follow them, and to do what is needed and asked of us. We white folks, and this is me, like to do what we think they need, or what we think we have expertise in contributing, or because we value one kind of labor over another. In practice, this means that if a BIPOC-led group needs volunteers to help with things like childcare or preparing food, then that is what I will show up to do to build trust with them. I love thinking about how we might do this work together in our UCM community, in Montpelier, and in the wider Vermont community. The Beloved Conversations program and our own newly formed UCM Racial Justice Group are awesome opportunities to get engaged in this work. I love thinking about how we might come together to build a community of critical friends and neighbors who are committed to being anti-racist in our values and in our actions. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Jeremy. And our final church member reflection comes from Shaolini Soriana Rea. Shaolini couldn't be with us live this morning, but she has recorded a reflection that I will share with you now.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Shaolini Soriana Rea, and I'm so sorry that I couldn't join all of you live today, but Reverend Joan was kind enough to think of this option of my sharing via a pre-recorded video. First, I want to say that I'm so grateful to have been given the opportunity to participate in the Beloved Conversations course. It has been a powerful experience for me in several ways, and I'd like to share just a few of them with you. One part of the program was an option for us to select one or more critical friends with whom we could discuss the readings, homework, our ideas about the course, and so on. I selected 2 people, my childhood and still best friend of over 40 years, and my oldest niece, whose middle name is actually Shaolini. I'm really close to both of them, and we ended up having bi-weekly conversations, usually for about an hour each time. Both of them were wonderfully dedicated to helping me explore my thoughts and feelings and reactions. And as a bonus, our conversations led me to learning more about their thoughts and feelings and reactions too. So by the end of the course, my relationship with both of them grew much deeper and stronger. I think they felt honored that I chose them, and we all became so much closer. That alone made me feel like this course was priceless. And there were still more reasons that the course ended up becoming so important to me. Another aspect was the homework assignments. They focused on helping us to get to know our family history better, to explore our roots. One way I did this was by contacting my relatives back in India. Although I was afraid my calls and questions might seem like an imposition, we had some great conversations. My aunts and uncles seemed thrilled to recall stories from the old days, and this led to our creating a family WhatsApp group. So this is where we put an application on our smartphones so that we could call or message or text each other easily. Next thing I knew, we were contacting each other multiple times a week, apparently with no end in sight because we're still going strong. The class homework turned out to be a wonderful vehicle for me to get closer with my extended family, which is yet another invaluable benefit to my participating. Lastly, being in the BIPOC group, that's Black, Indigenous, and People of Color group, meant that for a change, not only was I not the only brown girl in the room, but everyone in the room was a person of color. I can't even describe to you what that feels like after living in Vermont, where I spend pretty much every waking moment, 7 days a week, 52 weeks of the year, being one of very few people of color in the room, if not the only person of color in the room, when I'm at work, in a meeting, at church, in a restaurant, at a social gathering, when I go to the movies or my doctor's office, pretty much everywhere. So having the benefit of this kind of special time with a group of people who could easily understand how I felt and who could relate to me, and I could relate to them in ways that just allowed our conversation to be so much more than just words that we spoke. It was almost therapeutic. The feeling of the comfort that a person gets when you're surrounded by other people who are just like you is something that I bet most people in the majority take for granted. I felt really blessed to have that time with my BIPOC cohort. The experience made me realize also that I need to find ways to have more of that in my life. Overall, I was so happy to have been part of this initiative. And although there were moments where I didn't feel like I had the time for the homework or the pod meetings or the critical friends calls, I'm already thinking of doing it again for the next class. It was really worth the time commitment. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope for those of you who have an interest in growing and expanding your knowledge in terms of racial equity, that you'll consider joining one of these or other learning opportunities that are hosted by our church, and maybe I'll even get to see you there. Thanks again. Bye.
Thank you, Leslie, Jeremy, and Shaolini for sharing your thoughts and reflections with us. Let me close by saying that living into the spiritual calling of embodying racial justice in our lives isn't always easy, as the reflections that have been shared today illustrate. There can be uncomfortable moments and hard moments of reckoning. I personally am often challenged by the feeling that I'm not far enough along, that I should have more of myself figured out by now. Participating in beloved conversations helped me to be more gentle with myself and to accept where I am and who I am as an Asian American, Filipina, daughter of immigrants, woman of color, as a minister living and serving in a largely white community, As the spouse of a white Vermonter of European settler colonial ancestry, and as the mother of a biracial child. It's complex, and this life is full of ever unfolding opportunities for growth and change. So while the journey of embodying racial justice can be difficult, there can also be deep joy in moving closer yet to liberation for ourselves and for others. Know that you are invited to be a part of this journey wherever you find yourself on the path. There is more to learn, and there is more love to cultivate for our own sake and for others.